Namaste. Welcome to session 104 of Bhagavad Gita, verse by verse, to continue study of chapter 13. From session 97 to 103, we studied chapter 13 called Kṣētra-Kṣētrajña Vibhaga Yoga. Today, let us do a revision of this chapter briefly. After the revision, we will have chanting of Mahalakshmi Ashtakam by Srimati Smita Pai. Now, it's time for the introduction of today's class by Dr. Komal sir. Over to you, sir.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Parampara. Today, we will be seeing summary of chapter 13, Kṣētra-Kṣētrajña Vibhaga Yoga. 13th chapter is the beginning of third Shatakam of Gita. We know that Madhusudana Saraswati has divided Gita into 3 Shatakams. First Shatakam is chapter 1 to 6, which predominantly deals with Karma Yoga Sadhana. Second Shatakam, that is chapters 7 to 12, deals with Upasana Yoga. And final Shatakam, Charma Shatakam, is dealing with Jnana Yoga, chapters 13 to 18. Particularly, chapter 13, 14, and 15, here Krishna brings out the essence contained in all the Upanishads. That's why it is said, Sarvopanishado Gavo Dokta Gopala Nandana. That too, in 13th chapter, is very important from a philosophical angle. The chapter 13 starts with Arjuna's question to Krishna of his wish to know about details of the technical terminologies, 6 particular terminologies which are used in Vedanta. They are Prakrti, Puruṣa, Kṣētra-Kṣētrajña, Jñānam, and jñēya. Though they look like disparate 6 different units, actually we can club them into 3 groups, because Puruṣa, Kṣētrajña, and jñēya means the same. It is dealing with Atma. Whereas Prakrti and Kṣētra means the same, and that is the other names for Anathema. So what are the features of Anathema? The matter principle, which is achetana, sadgunah, it has attributes, savikaram, it is subject to change. And again, this matter principle, Anathema, can be divided into Vyakta avastha or Avyakta avastha. This matter principle can be what we see around us, the whole universe, including our body and our minds, is considered Vyakta part of Anathema. And Avyakta avastha is that which is unmanifest, which is otherwise called Maya. All this, whatever we see, whatever we can observe, whatever we can experience, falls under the category of Anathema. Then what is Atma? Atma is Chetana Tattvam, the consciousness principle, which is Nirgunam, no attributes, Nirvikaram, it is changeless. Then what is that? If everything what we can experience belongs to Anathema, then the only thing which remains as Atma is that unobjectifiable experiencer. That unobjectifiable experiencer is Atma. It's a difficult exercise to assimilate the purport of this classification of matter and consciousness, Atma and Anathema. So here in this chapter we see 2 beautiful examples given by Krishna, which can be considered as almost equivalent when we explain about Atma, that is Akasha and Prakasha. Then we see the third aspect, the third terminology in this chapter is Jñānam. Jñānam, unlike the general meaning in this chapter, for the purpose of this chapter, is about preparatory disciplines to gain self-knowledge. So generally in Tattva-bodha we study that as sadhana, chathuṣṭaya, sampathi, discrimination, dispassion, discipline and desire. Whereas in this chapter, Sri Krishna explains the same preparatory disciplines, qualifications to acquire self-knowledge by giving 20 virtues. So with this, we'll go to some more details of this chapter. The first part, verses 1 to 7, will be dealt with by Dr. Satyanarayana. Dr. Satyanarayana, please.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Chapter 13 to 18 forms Antima Shatkam of Bhagavad Gita. Chapter 13, called Kṣētra-Kṣētrajña Vibhaga Yoga, is the yoga of discrimination of Kṣētra and Kṣētrajña. In first verse, Arjuna gives technical words and asks for clarification. The 6 words generally goes in pairs: Prakrti and Puruṣa, Kṣētram and Kṣētrajña, Jñānam and jñēyam. Some of the words are almost synonymous. Prakrti and Kṣētram both mean material universe, which is the object of our experience, world, body and mind, the achetana tattvam. Puruṣa, Kṣētrajña and jñēyam, almost synonymous, is chetana tattvam. Jñānam here means virtues or values or sadgunas. Next slide. Since Kṣētram and Kṣētrajña are closely connected, Krishna deals with both of them simultaneously in verses 2 to 7. First meaning of Kṣētram is the body. Kṣī means that which disintegrates, that which decays and ultimately dies. The body is constantly tormented by threefold tapas: internal, external and supernatural forces. The second meaning of Kṣētram is agricultural land. Only through the land, by sowing the seed, it can be converted into a plant. We have done a lot of punya and papa karmas in the past, and all those karmas are like seeds, and every karma can fructify into sukham and dukkham. Just as seed requires the medium of the field to become a plant and fructify, our karmas also require a medium, the physical body. Next slide. 3 things: the external world, body and mind are called Kṣētram. In short, whatever we experience is Kṣētram. All the 3 are subjected to constant change also. Swami Paramarthanandaji gives example for us to understand this. When we start describing whatever is in front of us, we forget to include spectacles, because once we put on these spectacles and once it becomes an instrument of observation, the instrument is generally included in the subject itself. Similarly, the body and mind is also instrument for observation of the world. If the Kṣētram is an experienced object, every experienced object presupposes an experiencer, illuminator or conscious principle. That enlivening conscious principle is called as Kṣētrajña. So, Kṣētram means matter principle and Kṣētrajña means conscious principle. This invisible, like invisible electricity which makes the fan go round, consciousness enlivens the material body. This invisible Chaitanya Tattvam is called as Kṣētrajña. As breeze is a mixture of both fan and electricity, live individual or transacting entity is a mixture of body and consciousness. Next slide. In verse 13.3, Krishna said that he is the knower of all the individual fields of activity. Vedanta says consciousness pervades everywhere. Wherever bodies are there, consciousness is manifest as life principle, and wherever bodies are not there, consciousness is not manifest. There is only one all-pervading consciousness which is manifest in some place and unmanifest in other places. Even though consciousness is all-pervading, this consciousness is known by 2 different names based on angle from which we look at the consciousness. This is just like one member of the family is known by different names based on the angle from which the person is seeing. Your child will call you parent, whereas your parent will not call you parent, but as a child. So the person remaining the same, one person looks at him as husband, other as brother, another as son, another as father. Similarly, consciousness looked from the standpoint of a single individual body is called as Jivatma, whereas the very same consciousness looked from the standpoint of all the bodies is called Paramatma. Jivatma and Paramatma are essentially one and the same. This recognition is called Jivatma Paramatma Aikyam. Next slide. In the verse 13.4, Krishna said he will explain what that field is, what is its nature, and how changes take place within it. The idea is whole objective universe consists of cause-effect chain only. That means all the cause and effect, the karya karana prapancha, comes under Kṣētram. Consciousness is indivisible, beyond time and space, and subject to change. The knowledge of these Kṣētra and Kṣētrajña alone is real knowledge, and that is the liberating knowledge. Next slide. In verse 13.6 and 7, Krishna elaborates 24 tattvam put together as Kṣētram. Prakṛti, the potential form of the universe, which is avyaktam. Mahat, buddhi, the cosmic intellect. Ahankara, the cosmic ego. 16 principles, that is the 5 subtle elements like Akasha, Vayu, Agni, Apa, and Prithvi. The Pancha Jnanendriyas, Pancha Karmendriyas, and the cosmic mind. And lastly, the Pancha Sthula Bhutani. These 24 tattvam constantly undergo change, and as a result of their change and their interaction, various properties are generated. With Raga, Dvesha, Sukha, Dukha, and Dhriti, we convert the whole world of Kṣētram into Vishaya and make world capable of giving Sukham and Dukham. Hari Om, sir.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. As we have just heard, after Lord Krishna concludes his analysis of Kṣētram and Kṣētrajña, he takes up the third topic of Jñānam in verses 8 to 12. While Jñānam ordinarily means knowledge, in this context, it means all the values and virtues of life, sadgunah. Shankaracharya says, if one has these virtues, called sādhanā, chathuṣṭaya, sampathi in Vedantic language, knowledge is very easy to gain. These spiritual, knowledge-friendly virtues are also called dharma, which is a stepping stone to moksha. The question may arise, why do we need to cultivate these virtues? And the answer is, because an unprepared, uncultivated mind cannot receive knowledge or assimilate it, even when knowledge is presented to it, which would be a tragedy indeed. Bhartrhari has written a work of 100 verses called Niti Shatakam, and here Lord Krishna enumerates around 20 of them in these verses. They are beautiful Sanskrit words, which we will recap. Next slide, please. Verse 8 covers around 9 virtues, starting with ātma-anātma, which is humility or vinaya at the thought or manasa level, freedom from self-conceit. Next is adambitvam, which means simplicity, not drawing attention to oneself at the kayika level. Next, ahimsa, non-violence in thought, word, and deed. Kshanti is mental strength, so there is no disturbance when expectations are not met. Kshanti has 2 aspects, titiksha or forbearance, which is acceptance without resistance of all choiceless situations in life, and kshama, which is a capacity and patience to wait for the future to unfold. In the next slide, continuing, the next virtue is ātma-anātma, is arjavam, which is alignment of the 3 aspects of the personality, kayika, vachika, and manasa, as an integrated whole. It is manifested as truthfulness, punctuality, etc. Acharyopasanam is reverence towards the Acharya, who represents the Shastra Jñānam which is within him. Shaucham is purity, both within and without, basically mental purity. Stairyam is willpower, perseverance, commitment, so that nothing can stop me. Atma-vinigraha is self-mastery in thought, word, and deed. In the next verse, next slide, 3 virtues are described. Indriyarteshu vairagyam, which means mastering of the sense organs, also called Indriya Nigraha, Damaha or Pratyahara. Next is Anahankara, which is freedom from self-conceit at the verbal level, not blowing one's own trumpet. Next is Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi Dukkha Doshanu Darshanam. That is not identifying with the body, which is only an instrument, and it has the defects of birth, death, old age, and disease. Next slide. Verse 10 enumerates 3 virtues. Asaktihi, which is mano nigraha, mental detachment from external objects, situations, and persons. This is not suppression, but transcendence, because this detachment arises from self-discrimination, Putra dara gradishu an abhishvangaha. Abhishvangaha is excessive attachment, and anabhishvangaha is lack of excessive attachment to what? To child, spouse, and house. Putra dara gradishu. And these are common mamakaras that all of us have. The next virtue is samachit tattvam, which is equanimity, no highs or lows, by practice of karma yoga. Right action with the right attitude of Ishvara Arpana Bhava and Ishvara Prasada Buddhi, followed by Gnana Yoga at the next level. In the next slide, we have verse 11, where bhakti is described as a virtue. And the Lord says, Mayi bhakti, you can invoke the Lord in me. How should this bhakti be? Avya vicharani bhakti, that is devotion which is unswerving and unflinching and undivided, ananya yogena. The other things I need to do, sevitvam vivikta desha, that is regularly retire to a secluded place, which is good for introspection, as well as jana samsadi, non-addiction to the company of other people. Aratihi, not getting carried away by people, but satsanga and association with Sat Puruṣa is okay, is what the scriptures say. In the last verse, next slide, Lord Krishna says, constant self-inquiry through Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasanam, not losing sight of the fruit of self-knowledge, is said to be Jñānam. And that which is opposed to this is Ajñānam. The important words in this verse are tatva, jnanartha, darshanam. So the more I value the end, Jñānam, the more will I value the means, jnana yogyata. And adhyatma jnana nityatvam, which means shastra vicharaha. So it is these 20 virtues plus the systematic study of the scriptures that are needed for Jñānam. And with this, the topic of Jñānam is over. Thank you. Hari Om.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. After teaching Kṣētram, Kṣētrajña and Jñānam, Shri Krishna teaches the most important topic, which is jñēyam, from the verses 13 till verse 19. Jñēyam is Kṣētrajña from a macrocosmic angle. Jñēyam means that which is worth knowing and that which everyone has to know in order to attain liberation, in order to attain Purnatva. This section gives the essence of Upanishads. It gives the essence of Brahma Vidya. In the next slide, we will see the verse 13, where Shri Krishna says, Pravakshami, I shall teach you, that is Arjuna and all of us, that yet jñēyam, which is to be known, and what is it? Krishna calls Tat Param Brahma. It is the Supreme Brahman. What is the benefit of knowing Param Brahma? Krishna promises Jnatva, upon knowing Brahman, Amrutam-ashnate, one attains immortality. Then he starts to reveal the knowledge of Param Brahma. He says this Param Brahma is Anadi, beginningless, and it is na Sat and na Asat, neither an effect nor a cause. In the next slide, we see we need an eminent guru like Swami Paramarthananda ji to explain these mind-boggling concepts. Brahman is Anadi, which means it is beyond the spatial and time limits. And Brahman is neither Sat or the effect nor Asat, the cause. Every effect that we see or experience was present in an unmanifested potential form in the cause. Example, seed is the unmanifested cause of the effect called as tree. If dreams are the effects, it was present in the unmanifested memory in the brain. So both cause and effect are within the limits of the time. Like everything which is a manifested effect of today was a unmanifested cause of yesterday. But Brahman, as told earlier, is Anadi, which is beyond time. So Brahman is neither Sat nor Asat. In the next slide, we see the verse 14, where Shri Krishna brings about another nature of Brahman, which is Sat Padartha or pure existence principle. This is a very difficult concept to conceive. And again, thanks to Swami Paramatmananda, who helps us to get acclimatized to this topic. He gives two examples, a tall tree and a golden bangle. In a tall tree example, tree is the noun, which is the substance, and tall is the adjective, which gives the attributes of the tree. In golden bangle example, although bangle seems like a noun or the substance, it is actually the gold, which is the real substance, as bangle is only a noun, only a name and form of the gold, and there is no existence for bangle without the gold. Let's extend this example to everything that we experience. This is house, here is a man, this is earth, etc. The word is represents the existent principle of Brahman. Is the very substance, and house, world, man, etc. are the adjectives with the different names and forms, which is resting upon the very isness or existence principle, or in other words, Sat Brahman. So Vedanta starts at Sat, the existence, and ends at Chit, the consciousness. It is the same Sat, the existence principle, which appears as Chit in the Jiva because of the medium, which is the subtle body. Sat eva Chit and Chit eva Sat. This is the essence of Vedanta. Shri Krishna says this existence Sat principle or Sat Brahman is the fundamental substance which pervades everywhere. Sarvatra panipadam. Literally meaning Brahman has got hands and legs everywhere. And sarvatra tishtati. It remains pervading, surrounding everything. In the next slide, we see the verse 15 where Lord Krishna says, all the sense organs are revealing Sat Brahman at all the time, as Brahman manifests through the functioning of all these organs. Sarvendriya gunabhasam. Yet, Sat Brahman is unaffected, unattached from all the organs. Sarvendriya vivarjitam. Brahman is guna-abhokhtr, the experience of gunas, yet is free from all the gunas, nirgunam. Brahman is the sustainer of everything, sarvabhrut, yet is asaktam, unattached. Just like when we see a photograph, we know that the very existence of the photograph is because of the camera, which is not seen in the photograph, but is the very sustainer. Just like a photograph, everything we experience through the sense organs and the mind is dependent or is possible only because of the invisible camera called as Sat Brahman. To appreciate this Sat Brahman, we need not go searching for it, but the perceptions that we are receiving of the universe through our sense organs is the evidence of its sustainer, who is the Sat Brahman. This Sat Brahman is unaffected by the universe, although is the very adhishthanam, the substratum. Just as the screen which projects the movie, but doesn't get affected by the drama in the movie. In the next slide, we see the method of teaching employed here is the adhyaropa apavada jñēya. That is, in order to reveal the subtlest substance, one introduces a gross substance and then removes the gross substance. Common example used is hand and light example. Although the light is all pervading, it is ignored because it is so subtle. So Guru introduces the hand, which is the adhyaropa, and says hand is visible only because of the light. Then the hand is removed, and this is called as apavada, and Guru advises us to continue to focus on the light. Like this example, Krishna introduces sarvendriya, all sense organs and the mind through which the entire universe is perceived. So sarvendriyas is adhyaropa, that which superimposes the Sat Brahman, and then he removes the sarvendriya, which is called as apavada, and Sat Brahman is unaffected by the sense organs, and that is mentioned as sarvendriya vivarjitam. In the next slide, we see the verse 16, where Sri Krishna says, this Sat Brahman is outside and inside of all living beings, meaning it is sarvagataha, all pervading. It is bahirantarascha, because Sat Brahman is so subtle that it is unknowable. Therefore, we use Ganesha, Durga, Rama, Narayana as representatives of Satchit Brahman in order to conceive the subtlest subject matter. Like in the Narayana Suktam, it is said, Antar Bahischa Tat Sarvam Vyapya Narayana Stitaha. For Narayana to be all pervading, he has to be the subtlest Sat Brahman only. This Sat Brahman is Acharam, non-moving, as it is the very Adhishtanam, the substratum, but also is Charam, meaning seemingly moving, as all living beings, the Jivas who are mobile, have the medium which reflects the very sentient Brahman. In the verse 17, which is in the next slide, we see it is reiterated that the Sat Brahman is indivisible, meaning it is Ekam, only one Purna Satyam. But it does appear as divided in all beings because of the multitude varieties of Jiva Rashis in the universe. This is nothing but the Vishwarupa Brahman. So here, Chit aspect of Brahman is highlighted. It is the same Sat Brahman reflects as Chit Brahman or consciousness principle in all Jivas because of the reflecting body medium, which is this subtle body. Just as there is only one Akasha, one space, but because of the seemingly different containers like the rooms, house, etc., space appears as many. In reality, the containers are not many, but there is only one container, is the space. So is the Sat Brahman, which appears as many Chidatma. It is the same Kshetrajña in every Kṣētram. Talking about Akasha, the Akashopasana, meditating upon the space, which is so subtle, can make our mind very, very subtle. As studied before, Brahman is Jagat Srishti, Sthiti and Laya Karanam. Out of that pure Brahman alone, all the names and forms of the universe have originated, and they exist, and then they dissolve back into the same Brahman. We studied also this particular concept in the Mundakopanishad, where the spider example was taken to explain the same thing. In the verse 18, we see Jyotishamapi Tajyotihi Tamasah Paramuchyate Jñānam jñēyam Jnānagamyam Hrudi Sarvasya Vishtitam. This Sat Rupa Brahman is the light of all lights. Mahadeva also means light of all lights. This verse also is borrowed from the Mundakopanishad by Sri Krishna. In Vedanta, the word light means that in whose presence everything else is recognized. This light reveals billions of suns and more than that. This ultimate light is the consciousness principle. Only with the awareness Chit principle, everything else is known. This Brahman is Param Tamasaha Uchyate, beyond darkness, meaning ignorance will simply vanish when this light of ultimate knowledge arrives. It is the Shastras and the Guru who will remove the darkness of the ignorance using the light of knowledge. This Satchit Brahman alone is in the form of everything. Jñānam, which is the means of knowledge. Jñēyam, which is the Brahman itself. So the subject, the object, the instrument, the destination, and everything is Brahman. This is similar to the Brahmarpanam Brahma Havir verse that we have studied in the 4th chapter. Sarvam Brahmamayam Jagat. Although Brahman is everywhere, we know and recognize this only using our mind and the right intellect. Sarvasya Hrudi Vishtitam. Hrudi means the mind. Contemplation of the Brahman happens only through the mind. In the verse 19, Sri Krishna says, he has taught Kṣētram, Kṣētrajña, Jñānam and jñēyam briefly, and he says, knowing this, a true devotee becomes fit to attain his nature, meaning one is on the course to attain Jivan Mukti, that is liberation within this life itself. Hari Om.
We have seen that Lord Krishna has completed 4 topics out of the 6 topics that Arjuna wanted to know. And now, in the verses 20 to 24, he is going to deal with the final 2 topics, namely Puruṣa and Prakrti. Verse 13.20. Prakritim Puruṣam Chaiva Vidyanadi Ubhavapi. Puruṣa and Prakrti, both as beginningless principle Anadi, means without a beginning. This Puruṣa and Prakrti This mixture is Ishvara. Brahman plus Maya is equal to Ishvara. Vikaraha means Karyam. All the products like the world, body, and mind are born out of the basic Prakriti, and every object has its own property. It has got a color, form, weight. These properties are born out of Prakriti alone. The rule is that the properties of the cause will inhere in the effect also. Karana gunaha karye anuvartante, Prakriti gunaha prapanche anuvartante. Vikaramscha gunamschaiva vidhi prakriti sambhavan. The products of Panchabhutas and their involutes and their gunas are born out of Prakriti, while the Puruṣa remains changeless. And Shankaracharya points out that even the properties like Raga, Dvesha do not belong to the Puruṣa, but they all belong to Prakriti alone. Verse 13.21, the next slide. There are two aspects which are being talked about here. One is kartrutvam and the other is abhoktrutvam. Karyam means a product which is a sthula shariram, the physical body, all the bhautikas elementals. Karana means the sukshma shariram or the subtle body, 5 sense organs, 5 elements, mind, ahankara, and intellect. Kartrutve. In the creation of the physical and subtle bodies, prakriti hetu ruchyate. Prakriti is declared to be the hetu, the cause. The entire visible universe and the experienced universe is Prakriti. Then what is this Puruṣa? Krishna says, do not search for the Puruṣa, as the Puruṣa is none other than the experiencer I. Puruṣa sukha dukkhanam bhoktrutve heturuchyate. Puruṣa is I, the very subject. The enclosure is Prakriti. The enclosed consciousness, I am the Puruṣa. Verse 13.22 in the next slide, sir. Before the creation, Puruṣa was neither the subject nor was Prakriti in the object. When the universe evolved, the body and the mind were created, and the all-pervading Puruṣa got enclosed within the body-mind enclosure. Puruṣa Prakriti-stha. Prakriti means Shariram. Prakriti is body-mind complex. Prakriti-stha means enclosed. Prakriti jan gunan. All the consequences, all the products of Prakriti like thought, modifications, raga, dvesha, pleasure, pain, sattvic thoughts, tamasic thoughts, etc. Sada sat yoni janmasu karanam. Sat yoni means superior body. Asat yoni means inferior body. Thus, punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam. Taking higher birth of devas, taking lower births of animals, plants, and asura. In short, the entire samsara chakra. Guna sangaha eva adya samsarasya karanam. Guna means the attributes of the body-mind complex which belongs to Prakriti. I get attached with Prakriti. Puruṣa by itself does not have janma. Instead of claiming this birthlessness of Puruṣa, I identify with Prakriti and suffer. Verse 13.23, Upadrashtanumanta. That Puruṣa Tattvam is Nirguna, Nirvikara, Satya, Chetana Tattvam. Do not search for it anywhere else, as that Puruṣa is there in Asmin Dehe, just as Akasha is in every container. This Puruṣa is in all of us as the essence. Para means free from all limitations. Upadrashta means intimate witness of everything happening inside. Anumantacha, that which blesses the activities of the Prakriti. Consciousness blesses the inert body and mind. All the activities, good or bad, moral or immoral, the consciousness does not discriminate or judge, but consciousness blesses. Asanga. This is called Anumanta. Bharta. It is that which lends existence. Sthiti Karanam. Bhokta. This Puruṣa or experiencer is the illuminator of the attributes pleasure and pain as Bhokta. Maheshwara means Swatantra, the free one. When I understand that the attributes of the Prakriti do not belong to me, but belong to the Prakriti alone, and I climb to be attributeless, I, the Jivatma, am called Paramatma. That will depend upon whether I am ignorant or wise. Therefore, ignorant I is Jivatma and the wise I is Paramatma. Verse 13.24, the last one. Ye evam vetti. Suppose a person gains this knowledge. The first knowledge itself is that I am a mixture of Prakriti and Puruṣa. Gunais saha. He also knows that there are many attributes like fat, lean, old, bald, and hair. All are physical attributes. There are subtle attributes like anger, envy, etc. They are all internal attributes belonging to Sukshma Sharira Guna, Sthula Sharira Guna, Karana Sharira Gunas. So, I should know that all attributes belong to the Shariram, which is Prakriti. Sarvatra Vartamanopi, play the role required at that particular moment. You should know when to switch your roles, like to transform from father to son to husband, etc. It is not physical, but only internal. Sahabhuyo na abhijayate. Such a gnani does not have a rebirth at all. I do not have punarjanma. With the 24th verse, Lord Krishna has completed all the 6 topics that Arjuna wanted to know. Hari Om. Thank you.
Hari Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. In verse, Swamiji explains the important verse. Swamiji explains in 5 steps. The first step is the Karma Yoga, removes the mental impurity and refines mind or malanivritti or raga, dvesha, kama, krodha, etc. The next sadhana is upasana or meditation, sadgunah ishvara upasana. It calms mind and harmonizes the mind and focuses inside. This is vikshepa nivritti. The third stage is Vedanta Shravanam Ajnana Nivritti. Fourth stage is Mananam or Samshaya Nivritti, clears all doubt. Fifth stage and the final is removal of Vasana, unhealthy Vasana like anxiety, frustration, self-pity, sense of insecurity, fear, attachment, or Vasana Nivritti. In this verse, Atma is mentioned 3 times. The seeker has to identify Satchidananda Atma in Hridayam, which is also referred here as Atma, using instrument of refined buddhi, again referred here as Atma, supported by Guru Shastra Upadesha. Next slide, please. In verse 26, Sri Krishna says it is not necessary that knowledge should be acquired from Upanishad or Gita alone. A competent guru can convey the knowledge in the language which seeker can understand. Many saints have transcribed Vedantic knowledge in vernacular language. Take for example, 17th century when temples and gurukulas were being destroyed, getting Vedantic knowledge was very difficult. Swami Ramdas, who influenced Shivaji Maharaj, taught Vedantic principles in a very simple language. ज्या ज्या ठिकाणी मन जाय माझे त्या त्या ठिकाणी निज रूप तुझे मी ठेव तिथे सद्गुरु पाय दोनी. Whatever my mind can comprehend is the manifestation of Lord, and wherever I go, it's Sadguru's feet there. It is important Vedantic teaching of Nirguna and Saguna Ishvara in simple language. Therefore, Sri Krishna says it is the content which is important, not the language, book, or location. Next slide, please. In verse 27, Sri Krishna says anything born, moving or stationary, is born out of Kṣētra-Kṣētrajña samyoga. The cause of samsara is identification with Kṣētra or Prakrti, which leads to dehabhimana or apurnatva. Jñānam clears this basic error, and this is the only remedy. Body will come and go. Important is to understand the permanence of Kṣētrajña. Next slide, please. In verse 28, now Sri Krishna enumerates phalam or benefit from this verse onward. The first benefit mentioned here is correct vision or samadarshanam. Body may differ, change and perish, but Chaitanya Tattvam behind them is constant. Jnani develops a correct vision of seeing the imperishable Brahman in all beings. Next slide. Verse 29. The second benefit of Amritatvam Prāpti or immortality is highlighted here. Having realized that everything is manifestation of God, Jnani attains freedom from insecurity. Furthermore, he comes out of self-destruction mode, getting trapped in papa punya phala and therefore life-death cycle. Secondly, identifying with Prakriti, hence unable to enjoy the higher self and the bliss. Next slide, please. In verse 30, Jnani gives doership and understands all actions are done by Prakriti. Brahman does not perform any action. This is essential to come out of pap, punya and karma cycle and exhaust all karmas. Does not mean inaction. Great masters like Swami Vivekananda or Shankaracharya worked very hard but worked without doership. Seekers should continue to follow Swadharma as laid down by Shastras without sense of doership. Next slide. Verse 31. This is a very important verse with deep Vedantic meaning. Clarifies the understanding regarding Atma. Swamiji explains this with a hall and space analogy. There is a space inside hall. Space is outside the hall also. It is the same space which is everywhere, and space encloses everything. Similarly, consciousness is inside me. Consciousness is outside also. Consciousness is in everybody is same. Everyone evolves from the same consciousness, that is Sthiti Karanam, and Jnani then claims, I am that consciousness, Jagat Karanam. Verse 32. Characteristics of Atma are described here. Atma is changeless, and since it is unborn, it is free from Shadvikara or therefore called as Nirvikara or Avyaya. It is free from attributes, therefore Nirgunatvam. Dwelling in the body, it does not perform any action nor has any desire and remains unaffected by result, therefore akarta and abhokhtr. Next slide, please. Verse 34, 33 and 34. Atma is compared with sky and sun. Just as sky is present everywhere and is not affected by what goes under it, Atma is sarvagata and is not tainted by karma. And just as sun is the source of light, Atma is the sole source of illumination and therefore Chaitanya Tattvam and Ekaha. Next slide, please. Verse 35. Final benefit is spoken by Sri Krishna in this verse, that is moksha. Jnani develops jnana chakshu and clearly understands difference between kshetra and kshetrajña. Final attributes of Atma is also described here. Satyam, the ultimate truth, that is Brahma Satya, Jagat Mithya. Next slide, please. In summary, Sri Krishna in this section teaches the spiritual sadhana seeker needs to undertake and explains Jnanaphalam and attributes of Atma. With this, Sri Krishna concludes the teaching of chapter 13. Hari Om.
So, Sri Krishna concludes the 13th chapter by enumerating some of the benefits of this Jñānam. He says, this alone is Brahmatvam, Aham Brahmasmi, iti Brahmatva prāpti. That Brahmatva, limitlessness, that is the ultimate benefit of this Moksha Shastra. As a wave, I am limited. But once I know I am water, I can claim that I am everywhere. So these are the benefits. In simple language, it's called Jivan Mukti. Jivan Mukti is the benefit of this knowledge. And therefore, Krishna concludes, hey Arjuna, gain this knowledge. It will make a difference in your life. All the other disciplines of knowledge will not make any fundamental difference, whereas this knowledge makes a crucial difference. It takes you from bondage to liberation. With this, Sri Krishna concludes the 13th chapter. The chapter is titled Kṣētra-Kṣētrajña Vibhaga Yoga, because in this chapter, Krishna clearly differentiates consciousness and matter. Kṣētram meaning matter, and Kṣētrajña meaning consciousness.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. नमस्तेस्तु महामाये श्रीपीठे सुरपूजिते शङ्खचक्रगदाहस्ते महालक्ष्मी नमोस्तुते नमस्ते गरुडारूढे कोलासुरभयङ्करी सर्वपापहरे देवी महालक्ष्मी नमोस्तुते सर्वज्ञे सर्ववरदे सर्वदुष्टभयङ्करे सर्वदुःखहरे देवी महालक्ष्मी नमोस्तुते सिद्धिबुद्धिप्रदे देवी भुक्तिमुक्तिप्रदायिनी मंत्रमूर्ते सदा देवी महालक्ष्मी नमोस्तुते आद्यांतररहिते देवी आदिशक्ति महेश्वरी योगजे योग संभूते महालक्ष्मी नमोस्तुते स्थूल सूक्ष्म महारौद्रे महाशक्ति महोदरे महापापहरे देवी महालक्ष्मी नमोस्तुते पद्मासनस्थिते देवी परब्रह्मस्वरूपिणी परमेशी जगन्मातः महालक्ष्मी नमोस्तुते श्वेतांबरधरे देवी नानालंकारभूषिते जगस्थिते जगन्मातः महालक्ष्मी नमोस्तुते महालक्ष्माष्टकं स्तोत्रम् यः पठेत् भक्तिमान् नरः सर्वसिद्धिमवाप्नोति राज्यं प्राप्नोति सर्वदा एककाले पठे नित्यं महापापविनाशनम् द्विकालं यः पठे नित्यं धनधान्यसमन्वितः त्रिकालं यः पठे नित्यं महाशत्रुविनाशनम् महालक्ष्मी भवे नित्यं प्रसन्ना वरदा शुभा महालक्ष्मी भवे नित्यं प्रसन्ना वरदा शुभा.
Thank you, Smita Madam, for a wonderful divine chanting. Thank you all the teachers of the day for a wonderful recap session. Next week, we will resume Mundaka Upanishad study in our session 105. That is on Friday, 8th of July. Before that, on Monday at 6:45 p.m. on 4th of July, let us log in for Disha 16. Hari Om. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Tat Sat. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.